When I talk about creativity, I'm not just thinking, though, about music or art or poetry. I'm thinking about creativity in a much broader sense. Fundamentally, creativity is the process of improving. It's how we as a species, as individuals, get better. And this could be everything from coming up with new medical technologies to new ideas for a business to just figuring out how to entertain your kids on a snow day, which I'm sure a lot of us have just gone through. So creativity is everywhere and it's all around us. And the question then becomes, well, where do the ideas come from? And many people have this sort of genius myth of creativity, that the kind of lone genius who's sitting alone in their workshop and just dreaming up these brilliant inventions, maybe like Thomas Edison, just thinking of thousands of things like the light bulb, of course, and the phonograph and motion pictures. But the reality is that Edison didn't work alone. He ran an idea factory. He employed hundreds of people and carefully put them together in what he called these mucker teams. And their mission was just to try out everything. So it was a big trial and error of experimentation. There was lots of borrowing from other people, sometimes kind of ruthlessly. Edison even stole some ideas. And there were a lot of duds. There were a lot of bad ideas along the way. So Edison's process wound up being much more about discovery than it was lone genius. And perhaps the most interesting part is that Edison himself talked about creativity in this way. So he said, ideas aren't brain-born. There's no such thing as a brain-born idea. Everything exists from the outside. There's a certain inevitability to my inventions, and I'm just coming along to discover them. And you hear similar things like from author Stephen King, talking about how creativity is like archaeology, and his stories, he's unearthing them from the ground. Elizabeth Murray, the painter, talks about being a safe breaker, trying things until the right combination clicks. Or there's filmmaker David Lynch, who talks about being a chef, and his role, is just preparing the fish, but you wouldn't take credit for the fish itself. And even the root of a word like invention comes from the Latin inventio, which means discovery. And many, many years ago, people seemed to think about creativity much more in this discovery type way rather than this lone genius model. And that's something that actually seems to have changed even fairly recently. So if you look at, for instance, how people have written about creativity in books and the extent to which it's associated with things that are internal versus external, there seems to be a shift even over the last 100 years in the extent to which people think about creativity as something that's coming from the inside versus the outside. So what I wanted to do in this book is ask the question, what if we take this notion seriously? What if great ideas really are discovered? What if there is a certain kind of inevitability to some ideas? I'm going to give you a few insights about each of these stages that I think address maybe some of the common mistakes that people make when it comes to creativity. Okay, the first one, originality is overrated. In one of my favorite Simpsons episodes, Homer becomes an inventor, and he's really bad. He's a really bad inventor. He comes up with things like a makeup shotgun and a everything's okay alarm. And what's funny about Homer's inventions is that, of course, they're new, but they have no practical value whatsoever, right? They don't provide any utility to people. And this highlights actually a really important tension in creativity that, of course, a creative idea has to be original, but it also has to have some kind of value to people. People have to want it for something. And we find actually in our research that creators often get that wrong. So here's one study we did with 150 entrepreneurs, and we asked them to brainstorm ideas for a business. So we said, there's a vacant storefront in your town, and just come up with a business, and we gave out actually a bonus based on how successful those ideas were. So like other people rated, well, would you actually go to that business? And so we got some really original ideas, like a lazy river store. I don't know exactly what that is. And then we also got some ideas that were pretty unoriginal, like a secondhand goods store or cat cafe. And so when we asked our creators, our entrepreneurs, how much did you focus on being original and how likely are you to win the competition? Basically, people who thought they had been more original or who had focused more on originality thought they were more likely to succeed. But in fact, the opposite was the case. It was the folks who had focused on these less original ideas that actually had ideas that were more successful. We also analyzed 10 seasons of the show Top Chef, which is a cooking show where very experienced chefs are competing, and each episode they're coming up with different dishes. And so we coded just in each instance how the chefs talked about their dish, and did they try to do something original and creative. And we actually find that in instances where people say, I tried to do something really original, they were often twice as likely to get kicked off the show and be eliminated because they had the worst rated dish. So this highlights attention, and of course we have to focus both on novelty and originality, but I think we often get that weighting wrong. We focus too much on the originality piece. And in fact, what I argue for in my book is something like a 5% novelty rule. There's a really fascinating study that was done on scientific papers showing that the most influential scientific work is about 95% conventional and only 5% original. And you actually see the same kind of ratio endorsed by a lot of creators. Virgil Abloh, who designed for Louis Vuitton and then Off-White, and is really credited with like bringing street fashion to the luxury world, talked about this as his kind of cheat code. Bob Dylan used this in his songwriting technique. So this can be a very powerful way of starting with things that are known and established and adding your own tweak.
I've read that constraints help people be creative. So for example, an advertising team needing to come up with an ad of a certain size versus being able to do anything that they want. Do you think that constraints might be a relevant factor in creativity?
Absolutely. I've got a chapter called Think Inside the Box. I got to put the emphasis in the right place. Think Inside the Box. And Think Inside the Box is all about the power of constraints. A study that I love, they had people brainstorm ideas for children's toys. And in one condition, people could come up with anything they wanted. And in the other condition, the researchers just randomly selected 5 shapes, like, a cone and a handle. And they said, whatever your toy is, it has to incorporate these 5 shapes. Well, they found when they had actually experts rate those toy ideas that the people who had been given those constraints actually came up with better ideas. And the reason why is that they started their kind of creative process in a completely different place. When we have this blank slate, we think about existing toys like, a train or a teddy bear or whatever. But when you start with, I've got to use these 5 shapes, oh gosh, what is that possibly going to be? It sets you down this completely different path. And that can actually lead you into some much more interesting terrain or directions.